It is 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, March the 24th, 2021. We want to welcome to the Dallas Independent School District STEM Environmental Education Center virtual field trip, Annie Purell from Georgetown, Deerfoy from Frisco, Sidley Lanier from Dallas, George Truitt from Dallas, and Withers from Dallas. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful, beautiful day. Teachers, if you're watching and you have not registered, please do so. Go to www.tiny.cc/EEC register, sign up. This is just for our attendance records only. Today, the program is going to be physical characteristics of environments. During this virtual field trip, students will observe the physical characteristics of environments and how they support populations and communities of plants and animals within an ecosystem. Mr. Monroe will discuss living things. Ms. Fuller will talk about non-living things. Ms. Nash will cover basic needs of plants and animals. And Ms. Ramirez will talk about communities of plants and animals. During this virtual field trip, you cannot speak to us verbally, but you can go to www.tiny.cc/EEC /question/answer. If you have a question, we'll do our best to answer them. If we don't have time during the program, I will send the answers to your teachers and they can share them with you. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Mr. Monroe is going to tell you about living things.
Good afternoon, students. My name is Mr. Monroe, and my part of your virtual field trip today is that we're going to be looking at the characteristics of what we consider to be living things. And you know, living things, they're all around us, right? Because we live on a planet where life is abundant. Our planet, the planet Earth, is just the right distance from the sun. And because of conditions and different things that are found on our planet, life really can exist. Our planet is very unique in our solar system as compared to the other planets. Now, when looking at something that we're trying to decide whether it's living or non-living, we look at several different characteristics. You know, just basically, some people, when they're trying to decide whether something is alive or whether it's living, they'll look to see two major things happening with that item that they're observing. Is it moving? Motion. Or is it growing? That's another characteristic. And they limit themselves when trying to decide whether something is living. Now, take in consideration motion or moving. Now, we can't really use that in all cases, can we? Because if we look out on the street, we see a car moving down the street. Does that mean that that car is alive? No. Let's say that somebody is burning trash or they're doing a campfire or even a fire in a fireplace. And as that flame or that fire is burning, it tends to get a little bit bigger. It's growing. So does that mean that the fire is actually alive? No, it doesn't. There are other characteristics that we should consider that we should be thinking about when we're trying to decide something is living or not. Now, there is a big science word that we use rather than saying it's living. There's a science word we use. It is the word biotic. Biotic means living. Bio is a reference to living. And you know, one of these days, I know that you guys are third graders right now, but when you get into high school, there is a science class called biology. Now, ology means a very special study. So what do you think that science class is a very special study about? Since it starts out with bio, do you think it means studying living things? Well, I'm sure. So remember, biotic means living. Now, again, we know that there are lots of living things that live around us. Some live in the air, some live in the water, and some live on the ground. But we also have non-living elements or non-living factors that are also found all around, some in water and some on the ground. I've got this rock here, and we can simply look at this rock and we can tell, is it living? Is it biotic? Or is it non-living? Well, if I was to just drop this rock on the floor, do you think we might hear this rock say, ouch? No, it would not respond. So basically, I would consider rock non-living. On the other hand, living things can be a plant, they can be an animal. There's a variety of other things that are considered to be living, microorganisms that we call protists. But I have a plant right here that we can talk about the characteristics of living things with. Now, this is a corn plant, and this corn plant is a survivor. That means it survived or it came through a very extreme time in its life. We look at this plant, of course, we know that this plant, as far as no motion, doesn't have a lot of movement, only if the wind is blowing it. We'll never see it pull up its roots and chase some food down, will we? Because that's not going to happen. It's going to actually stand in one place and make its own food. And you guys will learn a little bit more about that later on with one of the other teachers that will be teaching you during your virtual field trip. But the reason I'm using this plant is it went through a survival mode. We look at the leaves here and we can see that some of them turning black. Well, that's because conditions were not right for this plant to be healthy. Now let's talk about other characteristics. Well, one characteristic is something called respiration. That is the ability of the organism or object to take in nutrients and change those nutrients into energy that would help them either move or maybe even grow. Well, guess what? This plant is not going to chase down some food. It's going to make its own food within its own body structure. And that, just like I said, a teacher is going to teach you a little bit about that later on. The other thing is this plant, another characteristic, is sensitivity. It was very sensitive to the change in temperature because this plant was in my greenhouse and I thought the greenhouse was warm enough. And when we got that extreme, that Arctic or that polar vortex that came down, and we had those very cold temperatures for a while, this plant was very sensitive to that. Even though I did have it in a shelter that was supposed to keep it warm, it responded and part of it died. Now let me share something else with you. Part of this plant, there was another one in here and it died. So this is considered to be a living thing, right? It's biotic. Believe it or not, the part that's left from the other plant, we can see where the roots kind of died and the stem is kind of dead. This is also considered to be biotic. Even though it is not alive, its history, its origin, it was alive. Now, Miss Fuller, a teacher that's going to be teaching you a little later on, she's going to be talking about non-living things, and you will see what the difference is, okay? Now, I really hate this, or well, I not hate it, but I don't like the fact that you guys are not here with us today. Because if you were here with us today, we'd be taking a walk or a hike into the Post Oak Preserve. And as we walk through the Post Oak Preserve, we would be looking for life in that forest. Of course, you'd see lots of trees, and we're in the growing season now of spring, so everything is greening up out there. There's blossoms coming out. So you get a chance to see a lot of living things actually waking up and coming to life. And while we're out there, I would be looking to see some animal life. So, with animals, it's pretty easy to distinguish the characteristics of living things. Now, with animals, and I've got one that I would be looking for if we were out there, and that's this little animal here. Over in the Post Oak Preserve where we have nature trails, we see sometimes these little turtles crawling around. This one's name is Teresa. She is a three-toed box turtle. And if we were out there today, because it's springtime, I would be looking for one of these. Now, if Teresa's not moving and all her extremities are inside her shell, she would give you the appearance that she is not living. But what lets us know that she's alive is when those little legs come out and her little head comes out and she starts moving around, motion. She also goes through respiration because one of her favorite foods is dandelion leaves. She likes to eat those. And that gives her energy. She converts that into energy, which is part of the respiration process. And then she will grow some. You see, that's another characteristic. The other characteristic is not so pleasant. Living things have to go through what we call excretion. And what that means, they have to get rid of their body waste, meaning they're either going to poop or pee, okay? Or urinate. Now, sensitivity, Teresa, if she was out in the forest and when winter came, she would be very sensitive to the change in the temperature. And most likely she would go into this deep sleep in a hideout, maybe in a burrow or a tunnel. She would go into a deep sleep and wake up only when it warms up. And it's warmed up now, so if we were out on the trail, I would be looking for little turtles like Teresa. And we call that being sensitive to the environment, having a bit of sensitivity. Now, with plants go through a process of reproducing, right? Either by producing seeds or flowers, that's part of the reproduction process. But with Teresa, guess what? Teresa is a female. She would lay eggs. So reproduction is another characteristic of, guess what? A living thing. Now, to really understand that, living things are made up of the basic unit of life, and that is cells. The same type of cells, they make a type of tissue. The same type of tissue will make a kind of an organ that's found within the organism or the animal or the plant. And then guess what? Those organs make up a system like the respiratory system or the circulatory system or the nervous system or the muscular system, and they all work together within that living thing. Remember, living things are called biotic. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Gorman. So if any of you have any questions, I bet he can answer them for you. Okay, Dr. Gorman.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. Now, Ella in Purefoy asked this question: how many animals live in the Arctic tundra? Okay, there were 1,700 species of plants and 48 species of land mammals are known to live in the tundra. Millions of birds also migrate there each year for the marshes. Few frogs or lizards live in the tundra. Foxes, polar bears, lemmings, Arctic hares, and Arctic owls also live in the tundra. Thank you, Ella, for that question. Now, Ms. Fuller is going to tell you about non-living things.
Hi, boys and girls. I just scared my lab assistant. This is Spring. Spring is a ball python from sub-Sahara in Africa, sub-Sahara desert in Africa. She's got very specific needs, and that part of Africa is very hot and dry, but she still has to have water and food. So we're going to be talking in this segment about how the abiotic, the non-living portions of an ecosystem, can affect the living portions, like our little active ball python Spring here. So I see she's smelling around. That's how she smells, by sticking her tongue out. She's trying to figure out who's in the house. Okay, I'm going to put her down. And let me share my screen with you, and we'll take a look at some of these abiotic factors. So the title of this segment is Abiotic Physical Characteristics of an Ecosystem. And I'm going to be covering things that are not alive and have never been alive, abiotic. Things like temperature, humidity, sunlight, air, water, wind, rocks, sand, all those minerals, all those wonderful things that are not alive but make life possible. So let's answer our question. What are two abiotic factors in an ecosystem? So the word abiotic, a means without, bio means life. So these are non-living factors without life. It means they're not alive and have never been alive. So think about the sun. The sun provides heat and light, but it's not alive and has never been alive. It's a star. It's not an organism. Water is necessary for life. It's part of our bodies and part of the bodies of plants, but it itself is not alive. Air is necessary for life, but it's not alive. Temperature is an abiotic factor that helps determine many life activities, but it is abiotic. So let's put our thinking caps on. I've named several of them. So if one or two of the abiotic factors you listed were the sun or water or air or temperature, you would be correct. Now let's look at the sun. Sun provides most of the energy we use on Earth. We do get some energy from the core of the Earth as far as thermal energy, that sort of thing, but almost all the energy that we use comes from the sun. It gives us heat and light, and plants need sunlight in order to carry out photosynthesis. We need sunlight in order to make vitamin D. So it's important that light hits our skin and also for plants. Sunlight provides clues to animals when to migrate, to plants when to blossom. Okay, here's another abiotic factor, water. Water is non-living, but it is crucial to life. It's one of the aspects of the earth that makes it possible for life to exist on our planet. It circulates through the water cycle, and you've been studying the water cycle since kindergarten, and you will continue in through 8th grade because the state of Texas has the water cycle in the science teaks through all of those years, because it's very important that you understand these concepts of evaporation, condensation, precipitation, transpiration, all those wonderful things that you've been studying since kindergarten. Now, water is a very unique substance. It's got a lot of interesting qualities or characteristics. We have water in all 3 states on our Earth at regular temperatures. So we've got liquid water, we have ice, and we have water vapor. So water vapor is the gas form of water. It's all abiotic, it's all non-living, but it's all very important. Temperature. Now, this is really close to home. We just had the polar vortex a couple of weeks ago, and the temperature got down to 0 degrees here in Dallas. I don't know about the rest of the state, but we were very cold for a very long time, and it affected our plants. Mr. Monroe even showed you his corn plant, how even with it being in the greenhouse, it still didn't make it. The temperature was so low that it killed the plants. It can affect the weather. It can affect how people behave, affect how animals behave. Animals may want to hibernate. People, when they get too cold, they shiver. So even though temperature is not a living thing, it is an abiotic factor, but it can still affect how we behave and how plants grow and how the environment can change. Air is an abiotic factor. It supports the clouds, and the clouds are real important. They're part of the water cycle. They carry the water in a condensed state really high in the sky. And when it goes up and gets to a certain level, it condenses on dust particles. But the air holds it up there, and when they get too heavy, they'll either rain, snow, sleet, or hail on us. Air can protect us from harmful rays of the sun, and good air is good for our health. That's why your mother encourages you to go outside and get some fresh air. That's why your grandmother probably opens the windows to let fresh air in the house so that you don't breathe stale air. It's very important, but it's not a lie. Okay, here's our concluding question. What abiotic factor in an ecosystem provides heat and light? I'm going to give you some hints. It's a star, it's abiotic, and it's in the center of our solar system. If you said the sun, you are correct. You get a gold star. Now I'm going to get out of our little slide presentation, stop sharing that. And I want to address one thing that was said in Mr. Monroe's segment when he was talking about growing and moving and things like that. Sometimes in the English language, we use words that can have many meanings. And so when we use the word grow, when it has to do with living things, it has to do with the fact that we have cells and that we have DNA and we can increase in size. I'm going to show you something. This is a quartz crystal. It's very beautiful. You may hear people say, oh, well, that was grown in the lab. Very often they'll talk about diamonds being grown in the lab or sapphires being lab grown. That doesn't mean that they're alive. It means that they increased in size. In this particular case, the word grow doesn't mean it has cells. It just means it increased in size. So that's one thing that it doesn't mean it had cells, okay? And here's some water. It's very we need this in order to live. This is Texas artesian well water, came out of the ground. It is very important. And we have quite a few artesian wells in Texas. And the water that comes out of these is very clean and it's good for us. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Gorman. If you have any questions about the abiotic, the non-living factors in ecosystems, he'll be glad to answer those for you. Thank you. Have a delightful afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Fuller. We do have a question from Hayden at Withers. And it is, what is the largest animal to walk the earth? And it is dead now. But remember the way Ms. Fuller described it, this guy is still considered alive. Okay, it is a titanosaur dinosaur. The 98 million year old remains of what might be the largest animal to walk the earth, a long-necked titanosaur dinosaur, were recently unearthed in Argentina. The remains of the unnamed dinosaur was first discovered in 2012 in Neuquén province of Northwest Patagonia. But they still have not fully excavated the whole thing. Thank you. And now we're going to let Ms. Nash tell us about the needs of plants and animals.
Hello, welcome to my classroom. Today we're going to be talking about the basic needs of plants and animals. So we're animals, and what do we need? Pretty much 4 things, all the animals. They need, say it with me, food, water, shelter, and space with air. Say it again. Food, water, shelter, space, and air, or oxygen actually, because if you're a fish, you need oxygen from the water. But those of us who live on land, we get our oxygen from the air. We also need the space to live. So we're going to say hello to my friend. So let's look at red and let's think about what red needs. Now red is a corn snake, okay? This is a pet quality one someone got and discovered how boring they are really after a while, and gave it to us. He's a very gentle, calm snake. He's never been out in the wild. So he gets his needs met by me. I give him a water bowl and a little house to hide in, and we feed him little dead mice every 10 days, every week or so. But if he lived in the wild, he would have to find all those things by himself. He would have to find little maybe birds' eggs to eat, or little mice to eat, little rats to eat. He would have to find a place to stay safe, okay? They don't, they most of the time just kind of hanging out because they don't need to eat very much, okay? Only about once a week, as I said. And you need to watch out for predators, okay? Stay away from those bobcats or coyotes, foxes, owls, hawks that might like to eat him, okay? So look at him, he's sticking his tongue out, smelling, he can see, he can feel. He's so beautiful. So all animals have to figure out their own way to get their needs met, okay? Now, they also reproduce. Now, snakes, most snakes lay eggs, okay? This kind, the rat snakes, do lay eggs, and we have found them in like a pile of bark mulch, okay? Sometimes you find a bunch of tiny snakes hatching, okay? Other snakes are what we call live bearers, okay? And their babies are born alive, okay? We think Red is a male, a boy. We're not really sure. It's hard to tell. Okay? So he won't lay eggs. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna put him away. Thank you, Red. Good job. Now, how about plants? Because plants are really important to life on the planet. Without the plants, we could not survive. So plants also need three things. Okay, so say it with me: sun, air, and water. Sun, air, and water. And they suck up the water with their roots. And I went out in my yard and I pulled up some plants and I knocked the soil off the roots so we could look at them. And a fun thing to do is to go dig up a weed in the yard or in the park or in the schoolyard. Don't do it in the park, they might get mad. And then take a hand lens and look at those roots as they get tinier and tinier. And the roots are sucking up the water from the ground. Okay? That's how most plants get their water. Okay? There are a few exceptions, but most plants have their roots down in the soil and they suck up the water with their roots. So this one, because I knocked all the soil off, the roots are drying out and the plant itself is withering. You can see how those leaves are drying up and it will be dying soon, although it will still be biotic, even though it's dead. Now, this other one that I pulled out, you can see how the leaves, the roots rather, are clinging to the soil. Okay, they're down there hanging onto that soil for dear life. And this one, I planted, I put potting soil around it, and it will be fine. It get sunlight, it's got air all around it, and water. I'm going to put water there. Now, another fun thing to look at is how do they get the sun and the air? They saw the roots suck up the water. The leaves are gathering sunlight, sunlight hits the leaf, and they also have they don't breathe the way we do when we breathe in the air. When we breathe in the air, take a deep breath. We breathe in the air, we use the oxygen, our lungs take out the oxygen, and then we breathe out leftover nitrogen and carbon dioxide. So the plant doesn't have lungs. They have little openings called stoma that open and close, and they take in air. They use the carbon dioxide, and then they give off oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. So with sun, air, and water, they make their own food through photosynthesis. And another fun thing to look at with your hand lens are the veins. See those lines on the leaf, the lines? Those are the veins. We have veins too, and we see them in your arm. What's in our veins? If you said blood, you'd be right. So the plants have blood? Well, not really, but they have sap, a mixture of the water and the sugar that the leaf is making, okay? And again, they go out to all the parts of the leaf, okay, and all the different parts of the plant too, to help it grow and survive. Now, this time of year, in the spring, if you go out in the park or the schoolyard, you can find a lot of flowers blooming. And this is reproduction for most of our plants. Most plants are flowering plants today. There are other kinds, but let's just talk about these because they're so pretty. The red buds and these little wild onions and this really nice Tradescantia. So the color and the scent attracts insects, bees, butterflies, others, to get nectar. See that yellow stuff? So the nectar is down inside the flower, but that yellow stuff, that's the pollen, and it's sticky. So when a bee goes to get nectar, they get pollen stuck to their body, and they go to the next flower and they take the pollen with them and they pollinate the flower. And by being pollinated, the flower can then make seeds. And with the seeds, the plant can grow more plants. So one fun thing your teacher can do is order peat pot seeds and soil from us here at the Environmental Center if you're in Dallas ISD, and then you can grow your own seeds. Any garden. You can also, what I like to do sometimes is grow a supermarket. I can grow a forest. Okay, I can use avocado, in this case, my mango, and you just eat all the yummy mango off, and then you plant the seed, and it will grow a pretty little tree. Okay, you can't plant it outside, too cold here. Okay, so I hope you have fun exploring in the park or the schoolyard, the neighborhood, to see what the plants are doing and think about how they're getting their needs met, and look for the animals that are living there too, the birds and the squirrels and all the others. It's a fun thing to go looking and observing. So if you have any questions, you can ask Dr. O'Connor.
Nina from Purifoy asked questions. What does the snake eat? And here we feed the snake mice. Next, we're going to have Ms. Ramirez tell us about the communities of plants and animals.
Hello, my name is Ms. Ramirez, and in this segment, we're going to be learning about the ecological organization within our planet Earth. So before we get started, I also have an animal friend that I'm going to introduce to you guys. Her name is Pepper, and she is a blue silky chicken. So I'm going to go ahead and pull her out. But Pepper represents an individual organism. So I'm going to go ahead and pull her out. Y'all probably met Pepper before. So Pepper is a blue silky chicken. They get that name blue silky because she has blue skin covering her ears, and the name silky because if you were to touch her, she would feel super soft like silk. And again, I give their name Pepper. I named her that because she looks like the color of like salt and pepper. So that's Pepper. Again, she's a living organism. I know that she's a living organism because she requires basic needs. So she needs food and water, shelter, and adequate space. Because I'm holding her, I can also tell that she is breathing, and I have witnessed her grow as she has gone through her life cycle. So she actually was incubated. She hatched out of an egg, very similar to this. She hatched out of the egg, and I've had her since she was a baby chick. So that's Pepper. Again, I said she represents an individual organism. If I had multiple chickens living together, that would represent what we call a population. So if we look at our little chart here, we're going to go over these vocabulary words more when we go into our PowerPoint, but just to introduce them to you guys, we saw Pepper, she is one organism. If I had multiple chickens, that would represent a population. And fortunately, when I went outside, I was looking for some of Pepper's favorite treats, and I also have a rabbit that loves to eat this. This is henbit. This is one individual organism of henbit. And of course, it gets that name because hens and chickens like to eat these. So this is an example of an individual organism. I also went and got a handful, and all of these individuals would represent what we call a population. So this is a population of henbit, and I gathered such a big handful because I have a chicken that loves to eat it, and I have a bunny rabbit that also loves to eat it as well. So that's just a quick introduction to organism and population. And we'll go over more in depth those words in a second. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys so we can take a look at a quick presentation. So again, today we're learning about ecological organization and relationships. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you guys will be able to answer these two questions. So keep them in mind as you are listening. The first question is, what is the difference between a population and a community? The second question is, give an example of interdependence between plant and animal communities. So keep those questions in mind. You should be able to answer those by the end. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and go over is that ecological organization. So take a look at this diagram here. Make some observations. What can you infer from the diagram? And I know I'm going to go by this super fast. So if you need more discussion time, you can just pause the video stream to allow more time for observations. But take a note at the vocabulary words on the right. And what do you guys observe as we go from individual to a biosphere? What do you guys notice is happening? What's being added on? So hopefully you were able to make some quick observations. I'm going to go ahead and tell you some of my observations. So again, we talked about individual. You saw the individual organism with pepper. Individual just means that one organism. Then we have that word and it's population. Now look at our picture. We went from one fish to many fish. So a population is simply all of one kind of organism living in the same area. So we had one fish as the individual, multiple fishes living together of the same species is a population. Now take a look at our next word, community. What do you notice is different now? Well, not only do we have our little goldfish, but now we have other living things in our community. We have a jellyfish, maybe some aquatic plants and a crab. So a community is simply all the plant and animal populations, and they make up a community. So animal and plant populations may be part of the same community, and a community is all of the populations that live and interact in an ecosystem. So, and then I said that word ecosystem. So now take a look at ecosystem. What do you guys notice now? What did we add? So hopefully you guys notice that in the ecosystem, we now start to add the abiotic or non-living elements. So we notice we have water and now we have the rocks. So when we talk about individual, population, and community, we're only talking about those biotic, those living things. When we talk about ecosystem, we're now talking about the non-living things included as well. And then we get to the even bigger picture. We have what's called a biome. So what do you guys notice is different from a biome versus all the other parts? So a biome is simply an ecosystem, multiple ecosystems that share the same climate. So think, for example, a desert biome or a rainforest biome. Those would be an example. And then the biggest umbrella of them all would be the biosphere. And look at how the biosphere and all of what it encompasses now. So the biosphere incorporates pretty much everything on Earth: the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, meaning the water, the geology, meaning the rocks, and then of course all of our living things. So hopefully you guys are able to see the differences between each of those words and what they encompass. So just keep in mind, individual is the smallest unit, and then biosphere is the biggest unit. And this is just a quick review. Our two important words for today would be a population is all of one kind of organism living in the same area. And then a community is simply all of the populations that live and interact in an ecosystem. So that's the difference between those two. And this is just some more little diagrams and infographics to help you better understand what each of those words mean. But we kind of already went over that with our previous slide. So here's a little video I want you guys to watch. As you watch the video, see if you can use those new vocabulary words to describe your observations. So see how you can use the word individual, population, community, and ecosystem to explain what you're seeing. And I'm going to go ahead and play the video. Those are our chickens, and we also see a turkey over there. The turkey is Mr. Gobbles, and our chickens don't really have names. What do you think those chickens are doing in the dirt? So make some guesses there. So let me go ahead and explain to you how I would use those vocabulary words. So when we talk about an individual, again, that's just the one organism. So I saw an individual turkey. So that was that one turkey. I also heard one organism making a chicken sound, that rooster sound. When we talk about populations, we obviously have a population of chickens here at the EEC. So those are our EEC chickens. They consist of their own little population. We also have a turkey population. We have Mr. Gobbles and his girlfriend, Mrs. Gobbles, who you don't see in the video, but they're another population. And then we have what we consider the community, would be all of those populations together. So an example of the community relationship here is we have a community of chickens. We have our community of the turkeys. We also have the plant community. So don't overlook those plants and trees. We have all of that henbit and those other clovers and other grasses. Those are also part of the community as well. And then when we talk about the ecosystem, remember, ecosystem incorporates not only the biotic or living things, but also the abiotic things. So what were those chickens doing in the dirt? The dirt is abiotic. Those chickens were giving themselves a dust or dirt bath. They do that to cool down, but also to clean off. So that's how the chickens are interacting with their non-living or abiotic environment. And I'm going to go over to let me go over to our next slide, if it will let me. Our next little slide are just some more examples of interrelationships. So as you watch the video, be thinking about what are some relationships that you see between these different organisms or populations. Now this one was pretty cool. This is back behind our pond that we have behind the building. Those are spoonbills. They're actually looking for fish and other aquatic organisms. Those whirligig beetles are carnivorous, so they're actually looking for other insects to eat. So that's a population of whirligig beetles. We also have a population of box elder bugs. Now those are not adults, they're mostly nymphs. Here we have a community of different populations. So we had a population of cyclops in that water sample, a population of volvox, a population of these cute little daphnia called water fleas. All of these aquatic organisms were living together, and that made up the community for this little pond sample I had in a bucket. So our next slide, I took some pictures as well. So look at these pictures. What do you guys see or notice? And then how do these pictures depict interrelationships? So the first thing I thought of was the nest. So the birds are dependent upon the trees to build and create their nest. So they're using parts of the tree to create their nest, and they're also using that tree to support the nest. So that's a relationship between the birds and the trees. They're using building materials. Also look at this wasp nest. We have a population of wasps living in that nest, and those wasps are using the tree for support for that nest. So again, animals depend and rely on plants as well. And then here's one of the plants that I like. This is mistletoe. It has an interesting story. It's actually a parasitic organism. So mistletoe, because it's a parasite, it kind of drains the nutrients and resources from the trees that it lives on. So this particular tree behind our building was covered. It had a huge population or several organisms of mistletoe living on it. And you can see here just how many individuals make up that population on this tree. And then, so the tree, we know that that mistletoe depends upon that tree for its resources, but also for support. And then this is just a cute little picture. You might be familiar with mistletoe because during the Christmas holidays, people will hang it over their doors and the adults will kiss under it. And you can look up the legend and the reason behind that. It's like, according to a Greek myth. But that's what mistletoe is. And my last thing is just a quick challenge for you guys. Go outside. It's a lovely day. We're in the season of spring. Draw and write about what you see in your backyard, your courtyard, or your schoolyard. And think about what populations make up that community, and then what interrelationships do you guys see. So this is a picture from my backyard back when we had that polar vortex and I was feeding the birds. You can see that it represents a community because I have different species of birds interacting here on this table, eating the food. So I had a cardinal. I don't know what some of those blackbirds were, or maybe some of those sparrows. And then over here, I have, this was at a farm. There were some possums that were eating some cat and dog food. And then here's some possums again in a persimmon tree. So the possums were depending upon that persimmon tree for food, but also for shelter. And they were using it to get away from us. So they were climbing on it. So it's interesting to see the different relationships that you can see in your own backyard or at school. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our screen share. And that's all I have for you guys today on ecosystem organization. We're going to give it back to Dr. Gorman, and he's going to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. And I did have a question from Hayden from Withers. And by the way, we are very glad to hear from Withers again. I want to say a shout out to all of them because we used to hear from them all the time, but it's been quite a while. Glad to see you guys back. And Hayden's question was, is grass abiotic or biotic? And the grass is biotic, it is alive. Now I'm going to share my screen. During this virtual field trip, students observe the physical characteristics of environments and how they support populations and communities of plants and animals within an ecosystem. Mr. Monroe talked about living things. Ms. Fuller covered non-living things. Ms. Nash, basic needs of plants and animals, and Ms. Ramirez, communities of plants and animals. Thank you, teachers. How did we do? If you would, go to www.tiny.cc/EEC feedback, fill out a very short form and turn it in to us. We'd like to have that information. And we want to wish all of you a great rest of the day. But more importantly, I want to wish all of you a great rest of your life.